Welcome to Horizons of Thought. Today I'm going to talk to you about one of the important tools necessary for effective critical thinking, and that is how to recognize fallacies in arguments. If you have logical inconsistencies or incorrectness in your arguments, it will undermine the logical validity of the argument, and it permits people to recognize that the argument itself is unsound. There are two basic kinds of fallacies that matter. One is formal fallacies, which have to do with the form or structure of the argument. All you need to do when you hear a formal fallacy is hear the failure of the structure and you recognize it as a fallacy. We're going to talk about those later. The other one is informal fallacies. And those ones you actually have to listen to the argument itself to uncover the illogical structure in the argument. The first and most important thing that I want to say in this list of fallacies is that uncovering one of these fallacies does not mean that the final conclusion that the person makes is incorrect. If you listen to an argument and you uncover a fallacy and immediately conclude that the final conclusion of the person making the argument is incorrect because you found a flaw in the way they made the argument, you have made the first kind of fallacy I want to talk about. It's called the fallacy. Fallacies by themselves do not make the final conclusion of an argument irrelevant. The second kind of fallacy I want to talk about is the strawman fallacy. Look, when you're arguing with people, it's really fun to mischaracterize another person's argument and simplify it too much to the point where it sounds ridiculous in order to make your argument sound better. I get it. We do it all the time. But it's logically incorrect. If you mischaracterize another person's argument, then the argument you're making against that mischaracterized argument isn't dealing with the point they're trying to make at all. You're therefore arguing against a position that doesn't exist. Now, as with all fallacies, you have to be really careful. I have been accused of making straw man arguments in some of my research articles about the structure of linguistic hierarchies. I'm not going to get into the details because you're going to fall asleep unless you're a linguist. But the answer that I've given back is, I am aware that the original researchers did not intend for people to believe the oversimplifications that I'm arguing against. I am also aware that there are more than 10,000 articles which use that oversimplification in their argument. I'm not arguing against the original researcher. I'm arguing against the oversimplification that everyone else has been applying liberally since the original piece was published. And I did want to say to the person in question, and you yourself know that the original argument that the researcher had wasn't the one they put in the article, that they had oversimplified it in the article because they didn't write the article themselves. They let their student write the article for them. That was fun. So, when you look at a straw man argument, be sure that the person really is arguing against something false. Because if somebody claims to make a really complex, nuanced argument that's carefully crafted, and then they themselves are basing the rest of their arguments on a simplified version of that argument, you get to argue against that simplified version of the argument and say, no, this is incorrect and here's why. The next one I want to talk about is slippery slope fallacy. You've all heard the kind of argument from your parents where if you don't study hard on a particular test, then you're going to flunk the whole course. If you flunk the whole course, you're going to flunk your grade. If you flunk your grade, you're going to flunk out of school. If you flunk out of school, you're never going to get to go to university. If you never go to university, you'll never get a good job. If you don't get a good job, you'll die poor and penniless. You know, for some people out there, that might be true. But quite often, if you fail an assignment, you fail an assignment, you make it up later. If you fail a course, you might retake the grade and do just fine for the rest of your school time. If you fail to get into university, you might still actually be able to have a successful business because there's plenty of other ways to make your money in this world. You can go to community college. You can go to community college and then go to university. You can go for work for a while and then go to university. You've got lots of options. Do anything different than the main path might still work out. Slippery slope arguments are a kind of fallacy. But again, as with the straw man argument, they're only a kind of fallacy if the slope isn't actually slippery. If the slope is slippery, the argument can be quite good. And here's one that when I first read it, I thought of it as full of slippery slope arguments. Malcolm Muggeridge wrote an article a long time ago, and I believe it was called True Love Hath My Heart, but I can't find the citation now, I apologize. I wrote an article a long time ago about how if we start down the path of organ donation, he wrote it right after the first human heart transplant, we're going to end up in a world where whole crops of human beings are harvested for their organs to serve the needs of others. And I thought to myself, wow, that's a lot of claim you're making. That doesn't seem very plausible to me, I thought when I was a young child. It struck me as the idea that we have hospitals that are carefully regulating how organ donation works, and that this is not a likely thing to happen because we're very careful about this. But while it seems that Malcolm Muggeridge was making one of these false slippery slope arguments, I was making an error in my own argument too. I was imagining that the authority that I saw in hospitals around me in my childhood would be the authority that would be exercised everywhere in relation to organ donation. Nowadays, we live in a world where we've had plenty of cases of people going to mainland China to get organs from prisoners who've been executed for their crimes. We've had horrific cases on the Palestinian border where people from Egypt were trying to get into Israel and they were denied access there, and gangs were rounding them up and killing them and selling their organs. We've had all the horrors that Malcolm Muggeridge predicted because he wasn't actually making a slippery slope fallacy. He was looking very carefully at what he knew of human nature and the horrible things that we would do to each other and what would be a result of a new technology entering into the space of the same human heart that is capable of horrific things to each other. And in fact, if you take a look at what's happened to all new technologies in history, many great things have happened. The world is better than it's ever been, and we in many ways live in a golden age despite what is going on right now. But at the same time, technologies can and have been abused horrifically. And there are no exceptions that I've seen. Every technology that has been used to help has also been abused and used to harm. Something that can look like a slippery slope argument isn't necessarily if it's carefully crafted and you can demonstrate that each step of the slope is in fact slippery. Another one, and the last one I'm going to talk about in this video, is special pleading. That is the idea that, and we've all seen this, you hear an argument, you argue back and show that the particular point the person was trying to make isn't valid, and then they move the goalposts of the argument. They go, well, but what about this more difficult point? And I'm like, okay, my response to that, and the response that should be, is I've won the first argument, you are now setting up a new argument, and we're going to go through this. That mistake that the person is making, that fallacy that the person is making, when they've lost an argument and then move to a harder or a more complex version of the original argument, is called special pleading. This one doesn't really have the counterexamples to it. Basically, if somebody's moving the goalpost of an argument, it's a new argument and it has to be assessed under the new terms. It does not actually go to support the original one. The original one has been shown not to fit a path of logical reasoning. When you look at these fallacies, and there are many more that we'll go through over many more videos as time goes on, pay close attention to the arguments that you hear, because you're going to see these particular fallacies show up over and over and over again. Sometimes you'll see the pattern of them and you'll be able to find out, no, the person actually does have a solid argument in there. They're actually dealing with the risk of fallacy and not making a fallacy in their argument themselves. Sometimes they can't do that with the technique that they're using, as with special pleading. This is my first of hopefully many, many, many videos on logical fallacies. Thank you for listening to Horizons of Thought. If you liked this video, please click the like button. If you disliked it, click dislike. In either case, please give me comments. Do you want to hear something on different fallacies? Do you want a better explanation of the fallacies than the ones I've given? I'll work on that in your video in the future. If you really like this channel and you want to support it, go down below to the donor box, click the subscribe button. In there are several options for monthly subscription, and I provide benefits based on those options. If you want to do individual contributions, I use those to help me get better equipment, which again, I'm going to be doing in a few weeks now that I've accumulated a little bit in that account. Thank you to my anonymous donors and contributors. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Horizons of Thought. This is me from the future, making it absolutely clear that I support voluntary organ donation, and I am an organ donor. I'm only using this as an example of a non-fallacious use of the slippery slope argument.